Go ahead, Erika. Share your screen, please. Yes, you need to unmute your microphone. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks to Mauricio, who invited me today to talk to you. And now you can see my screen, right? I guess so, because there are no complaints. Okay, so I thank the invitation to share today this talk. I believe that this is a very interesting topic. The idea of thinking this encounter among the different worlds and think about it. What does that mean? What we can learn of this historical process? Right now, we are at an iconic date, October the 12th, for Hispanic countries on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. This is an emblematic date, difficult to process. In Spain, during a long time, it was celebrated, and also Spanish-speaking countries. Then it started to make some noise, and then they continued celebrating it. And today, we do not know if it should be a holiday or not, a date to celebrate and commemorate. And I would like to talk about we can do during these days and historical processes. And we have decided in an arbitrary manner that starts with the arrival of Christopher Columbus to that island that he named La Española. So that's the title that I have, the encounter. We need to think in a scheme which is neutral, maybe, at moral level, more objective, as the incorporation of the American continent to the global population. It is the moment of this first globalization, geopolitically, biologically, the American world that was isolated in some way. Yes, we have evidence that Vikings were here, and there was population without the pass through the Bering Strait. We know that. But also, there are some suggestions that maybe Chinese were here also, or different tribes came to the American continent. But these first encounters do not have transcendence, do not create a permanent relationship. 1492, yes, from there on, America is part of this globalized world. And as I said, from the moment when this was happening, this has been a polemic process that causes controversy. It has been described as a heroic expansion moment when Europeans started civilizing this new world, or a moment of shame because it creates a cruelty regime, exploitation, and they even mention the word genocide. In a very illustrative manner, by Diego Rivera, muralist. In the era that we live today, and as you know, it is a very special moment where we are reconsidering political and economic principles that we thought were grounded about openness, democracy, that have been impacted by the pandemic and the world economic crisis. It has brought some expressions of rejection about the interpretations of this moment. And as I said, they are not new, but now they are more real. And we can see this clearly in the destruction of these icons like Christopher Columbus. On the right, we also see a statue of Fray Junipero Serra, who was canonized by the Catholic Church, but he was also accused as a genocide, a murder. In 1992, which is the closest moment when we have these open polemics and global about this date, 500 years of Christopher Columbus' arrival to America. In order to celebrate or mark this date as a holiday, we changed that label of the discovery, which is historically false. They were not discovering it by these kind of encounters of two worlds that in many senses is kind of deceiving, because there are three worlds and please close your microphones. So it's not only Europe and America, but also Africa. And also on the 16th century. And then we still think that Christopher Columbus arrived. We still think it was Asia. And a reasonable critic formulated in Mexico is that this intention of celebrating, creating coins, stamps, we have a Mexican stamp celebrating the encounter of two worlds. This is a coin in Peru, another one in Argentina, about this celebration or commemoration. Somehow it looks to heal history of those painful moments. And this is a naive resource that wants to disguise positive processes that were painful, like a cultural mestizo process to reduce violence and the valorization of First Nations in America. And as O'Gorman said, we sacrifice the historical truth to the political convenience. Right now, we are at a point where we are not going to look for these easy solutions because they need a sophisticated reflection. But on one hand, we need to assume that this process has dark and light shades, a painful process for those that experienced it. But we need to think in history, not about something that is going to be celebrated, but to be analyzed. So I invite you to think, what are we going to take home about this violent process? What we're going to keep for the world that we live today with more clarity, more sensitivity, and more calm. I believe that there are several elements in this process that can be rescued as provokers or something that can help us to understand the world that we live in today. And also about the possibilities, thinking about the past to imagine interesting future or promising future. So 1492 creates a world, a connected world. It is not the encounter of one, two, or three worlds, but creates a community, as I said, geopolitically, economically speaking, and biological. From then on, we are going to have intense exchange of people, services, goods, plants, animals, and also bugs. I shouldn't use the word, but yes, let's think about organisms in the context of pandemic. Also ideals, principles. In this sense, the Americas is an encounter place in a territory in a very short period of time. If we compare the whole world, Europe, Asia, and Africa have been in contact constantly from many centuries behind, but this has been a slower process to build these big trade paths and constant contact, punctual with time to recognize, to travel, to get to know each other. In the Americas, this was a kind of collision. In a very short period of time, these continents find this new territory. And migration from Europe was part of these networks that were created through the Atlantic Ocean, and the arrival of Africans that were slaves to work in this new territory as slaves in Brazil, Cuba, and the United States up to the 19th century. And this is also going to be linked to Asia. This encounter place in an explosive manner because time compacts itself in America. Encounter processes that took place in the old world get compacted in the new one. This is going to change the world economy and the way in which people live in the world. I invite you to think about cuisine. What would be the cuisine in Asia, in America, without the tomato, chili pepper, potato? America? What America receives from Europe and Asia changes the American world, but also the contribution of America changed the European nation world in a very important manner. Another important element is that America is in this route of the Pacific. So, in many senses, it's going to be an encounter place and exchange from Asia to America. And in many cases, this transforms what we have, this material American culture, Peru, New Spain, and also in the rest of the Spanish-speaking America, and even the English and French-speaking America. So all these elements between Asia and America, Manila, ceramics, Chinese ceramics, and also lac. The three of them have this American expression in different places of our America. And the circulation of objects, information, and knowledge is not going to be only diverse and intense, in spite of all the time that it takes to cross the ocean. For the first time, it's going to be based in empiric and practical observation. The world is already known and in a material manner. Sailors know about the distance, the currents to cover these spaces. So it is not surprising that we're going to turn from these maps that are based in a symbolic imagination, which also has religious content, as you can see in these two icons. This represents the world as it was known, the three continents. This is from the 7th century. It's Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean Sea in the form of a letter T. So that's the reality of that world. Now, in 1492, the globe that you see to the right is the globe created by Martin Beham before Christopher Columbus returned. So we can recognize this globe. It has some geographic information, and we just need to add America. In this case, Beja didn't know that Colon arrived a new world and not Asia. But these representations of the world will be there. You will see the representation of a mermaid and a sea monster. But it is based on empiric observation and will be useful for those that come ahead. To connect, to occupy, to trade with this new world. This empiric information, which is accessible and can be thought as relevant for the members of this world that is now connected. So it is on the other side of the globe, but it is interesting. It is part of this world in the one that I live at. A nice example is this book that was created at the Ottoman Empire around 1600. It is the Tahiti Hindi Karabi. It is the history of Western Indies from the Turkish vision, where Ottomans or the members of the governing class should know about this new world represented. And on the right, we can see this Potosi hill, which is so wealthy with their silver mines. So the word is one. We should know how this word is interpreted from the different spaces. Another consequence, which is also important, is that the awareness of a world that should be important to all of those that inhabit it, in spite of the deep differences. It is a world inhabited for those that belong to the same community. They are humans, they can acknowledge each other. Even when the representation of the Americas that were pictorically different back then, with characteristics that are fascinating, etc. Francisco López de Gomara, for example, writes the history of the Indies in 1452. The Indies is a new word, and they have very different things, but he insists elements are the same thing. So it returns to the humanity concept, as Mauricio mentioned. We belong to the same humanity. And this is going to lead us to some debates about the nature of autochthonous populations, the characteristics of them. This is a long conversation that extends after the colonial period and dominated by controversy of Valladolid, as represented in this picture. Facing Gines de Sepúlveda with Bartolomé de las Casas. This is an academic discussion that is going to have a transcendental impact on how the colonial city is related with the rest of the world, with America. So this is the controversy in 1551, concluding that indigenous are part of this humanity. They are sons of God, and they are also subject to the crown and have a series of rights that start with property and need to be respected, and they should be thankful to guarantee their heaven. They have a society. They know how to distinguish between the good and bad. They have principles based on natural law. And this will prevent slavery. This is not going to prevent all this robbery, but will consider the idea of a unique humanity that shares this world and consolidates this conception, and also America as the bridge in the space of the construction of a shared history.
America is not like separate, even though in America there are things that you cannot find somewhere where the utopias will be built in terms of building a new society. At the end of the day, is a space in which we recognize that this is a space that unites, not in a space that is eccentric or uh, distinguish in a different way what is to be separate. So we acknowledge the effort to build America like a bridge or a space of construction of a shared history with a common logic and language in many of the art exhibition. I'm going to show you two. One of the Incas images that you can find at the museums or in Peruvian churches, where the artists and historians rebuilt the past of the bishop of vice bishop of Peru as a shared companies, or the Incas or the governors of this great empire are the predecessors of the Spanish uh, kings. It is not like the Incas disappear, and it is a history that is millenare, shared, and in which we have the Manco Tapandar, like and Charles III. This is really interesting. This is not just a phenomenon of colonial phenomenon. With independence, we have these images of the path from the last governor Atahualpa to the liberator of Peru, Simon Bolivar, like you can see here. So there's a whole tradition that the Americans as a continent share with the rest of the world. We are not this the eccentric manifestation. No, this is a new and different world, but it is part of the world. The other one is this picture, Quaquecholan, was painted in the 16th century by one of the villages that allied to the Spaniards from the Valley of Mexico. The original village is in Puebla City, and in Guatemala City we've had a fantastic copy with digital images at the University Francisco Marroquín. So also it tells us how this process of integration of America to the rest of the world has inside the integration process amongst the different regions of America. But this people allied to Spaniards for conquering different parts of Central America, and this linen is the indigenous equivalent of a relation of merits. So the conquerors came to Mexico to participate in the establishment of the crown on these territories, and then they wrote to the king telling him what they did to make the rains be better so the souls will know, and they could be saved to go to heaven. I am a member of this expedition. I participated in these battles. I was part of this council. So I deserve a series of rewards. So this image is exactly the same thing, but in a Mesoamerican language. So the members of this village made an alliance with the head of the expedition and were involved in the battles to have more glory of the Castilian crown to your left. And this is sent to the king, so the king would acknowledge and reward them. So this talks about the common history of the construction of shared languages. So there's a whole list of merits written in Castilian, and those pictograms of their way of expressing themselves, but the king should understand. In their own logic, those spaces that are shared were created. And in that sense, America has the possibility of building these shared spaces or communication spaces where we have the communicating vessels of exchange, of expansion, both share languages, not probably in the sense of the meaning and the symbol, but to be able to reveal the shared interests, the things that are more convenient to the different global stakeholders that can be found in this space. I will leave this here, and if you have any questions, I will be more than glad to answer them. Thank you, Dr. Waldo. We want to especially thank you. We didn't ring the instrument, the bell, but I don't know if they have any questions among the participants. Please let us know. Doctor, why the statue of Colón and everything else around was removed? Uh, do you have any, is there any message behind that? We need to ask to the INA and the municipal authorities, the, the, the authorities of Mexico City. I think that this is part of a historical moment in Mexico and the rest of the continent, and more importantly in the United States, because they have all the statues of the South Confederation of the Civil War in the 19th century. But we see this both in the Americas and in Europe. There's a rejection to honor historical characters, that they are deemed not to be honored in a public space through a statue. It is not the first time. During the independence of the different American countries, this eagle, crowned eagle that was on top of the public buildings and churches were removed. So this the whole discussion whether to take down the images, this even though we're going to make the facade of churches uglier. So there's a whole renovation of history. We need to think different when it comes to symbols, and that sometimes there's a rejection to certain interpretations and symbols. And in Mexico, in this case, in Mexico City, the authorities decided that it was better to take a step ahead in case of a popular movement. All the eggs and tomatoes and the demonstration around, and that didn't happen, uh, and the statues were not destroyed. But I don't know when they, according to what has happened in other parts of the world, when it comes to destruction of statues, probably the Mexican authorities decided to remove them. Well, from the federal government, uh, discussion is that there's a condemnation, uh, the incorporation of the territory that after will be Mexico to an global economy and to imperial global system. I don't know if I answer your question. Allow me to ask you the following. I don't know how you're doing it in terms of time. Thank you very much. I am Hugo Lopez Araiza. I just want to ask you something it, that caught my attention. The indigenous sent the codex to Spain for the king to understand them. Did the king understand it, or it was just a bottle thrown into the sea? No, I think that this is a very interesting phenomenon. I don't know if this codex is in Spain, I think, but we sent, well, they sent the this letter between the American governments and Spain. There's acknowledgement of titles for the nobles indigenous and the villages that support the war. In the north, in Mexico, when those villages were established that have rights on the land, in many cases they come from Tlaxcala, they are Tlaxcaltecas, and we have the acknowledgement of the merits of Americans, uh, the same way how the subjects are recognized in the peninsula. Those are exceptional things among the peninsular subjects, and they are uh, spectacular in the American also subjects. And the thing is that they have to be equitative. So there's no any provision that establishes in this way because old regime right does not work. The Daimar and the different versions of Mayan and Nahuatl are official languages of the empire until the 18th century. In the 18th century, there's a whole effort to make all the inhabitants Castilian, but also the reaction were like through war and the viceroyalty, for example. Uh, so during the insurgents movements, they were acknowledged as official languages, and we thought that they were reclosed and they imposed. Yes, it's true. We need to undermine what represented for the indigenous to take down the temples, the idols, but on the other hand, there's a construction of those shared symbols or shared languages that make possible to unite an empire from end to end. Thank you very much. We have another question. I'm going to mute everybody because there's a lot of noise. Please unmute. The question currently, the president of Mexico is apologizing for the maltreatment of Americans during the discovery of America, of the Americas. I think that this is just politics. That I think it won't have a symbolic load. So the apologies made me feel mad. If someone has to apologize, is the people that are no longer in this life. So it doesn't. I don't want to say that everything that they did, like we have to keep like a neutral decision. So I think that there's a series of legacies of this process of conquest, and today they have negative consequences. The same thing with slavery, and those payments, or we are responsible as political communities to solve them. If someone is born indigenous, has like more possibilities of being poor or being discriminated or not having education. I think this is a real problem that was inherited from the conquest or the colony and how our national history has been. So I think in this case the government has to do many things to to solve this. The government as a representative of the society and not just passing on the invoice. So it is like to ask for forgiveness, that the King of Spain has to ask for forgiveness. I think that this is a shallow symbolism, that it doesn't make any sense. This is my own opinion. Well, or at least this is not the opinion of many historians. There are Federico Navarrete, who is very well respected, says that this Concentration Act is useful to ask for forgiveness. But I think that as a government, they need to solve the problems. The Pope Francis already apologized. Well, symbolically, this is important. It contributes to improve the situation. I don't know yet, but this is a very personal opinion. It could be a way of doing something and wash their hands. Okay, we already apologize. If there's a responsibility, I fulfill it because I ask for forgiveness. Well, this is my comment. Do you have more questions? Please jot down. I have one. I have a question. I want to add on the comment of Mr. Nava and the previous speaker, because in Guatemala we had a very similar process to when it comes to the putting down of statues. Well, in the past years, the government did the same thing that Mexico is doing with the statue of Christopher Columbus. And in Venezuela, we had the same problem. So I think it is not for the discovery of the Americas. It was more like an indigenous encounter with the Americas, plus the recognition of the indigenous part that that the European that came here and that is covering us. So what I wanted to say that this has been like a feeling expressed in several places of the Americas. And this feeling is manifested in the same way. As I do not share the following criteria. I think that it is historical and it's transcendent when it comes to history in Europe and the Americas, and I think it is like an act of resentment, uh, regardless of what happened, and with indigenous. So I think this is more like a resentment that I do not understand very well. So I just wanted to say that that it has not happened in Mexico, but it happened here in Venezuela. Thank you for your presentation. It's been really good. Thank you, Carlos. What I would put on the table is the removal of statues. It's also a way of making history. There's a rejection. As a historian, the statues are documents, are sources. At some point in Caracas and in Mexico City, it was decided to honor Cristobal Columbus with a statue. In Mexico City, the Avenue Reforma should be a visual history to tell the story of the nation, and Columbus was put there, but the conqueror was not given a statue, but it has to do with that is not being given the same importance than the one given to Columbus. So, well, at that time it was Cuauhtemoc. I mean, we have the statue of Cuauhtemoc. It's the only thing we have. So this interpretation of the national history by starting with the discovery tells us how they are thinking the history and the nation. And in this sense, it's really interesting. But the one that removed the statue is telling, no, this is not my history. This is not the origin that I see. So this is a very complicated issue because the public space belongs to all of us. How we are going to preserve the past or preserve the documents to be able to understand the past without affecting someone who felt hurt by these symbols. So this is an issue. The statue of the horse that of Charles IV. He was a lousy king, and the king on the horse step on uh, an indigenous. So it is a beautiful statue that is named the Caballito, and I don't want to have it down. So we are going to set the line. This is not a testimony of Columbus, but how the history of the nation was conceived in our different countries. So thank you, Doctor. Good afternoon. So I am from La Paz, Bolivia, and your presentation was really interesting. Interesting in the sense that in some way, we agree with all the political movements that have been happening in the last 10 years. As South American countries, there has been a trend of a change of criterion. The ones that are excluded will be included in the management of the thing of the power of the state. So by complying with the basic principles of geopolitics, I think we need a discussion about geoeconomics. But now that we are in the power, so let's start to make some changes. We're going to go back to our uses and customs of history, and we're going to change the ones that came and they maltreated us. So in Bolivia, there's a trend to separate those images that the outgoing government of Evo Morales included all. In Bolivia, we do not have the ones of the Republic of Bolivia. Now we have the plurinational state of Bolivia with more than 33 villages, independents that are on their uses of customs. Imagine 33 nations that originated in Bolivia. So this makes us think that geographically and geopolitically, Bolivia has several ecological status. We have altiplane, we have tropic, we have valleys, we have plateaus, and this is where we have all those three nations original. Someone says that because we are the pearl or the heart of South America, we do not we are not able to understand amongst ourselves. It's because we have so many nations, we have different uses and customs. The one that lives in the altiplane is very different from the ones that live in the tropic or in the valley. So we are called the dictator Pinochet used to say that Bolivia was the abortion of South America, that it should disappear. Bolivia has been a country that has been enclosed because of its geopolitical status, is regarded as by his neighbors, well, I think the neighbors that we have around us, and probably because of this issue. The issue of having so many nations that are acknowledged by our state leads us not to think under a same ideal or the same premise, even in the government policies. Someone from the altiplane does not think as one of the valley, and in Bolivia we are going through a very difficult situation. In 2019 and 2019 we had a visible change, a political change of presidents, and we have a new transient government in charge of a president without even thinking she was declared president. And now, because of the pandemic, next Sunday we will have the elections. Well, the Bolivians, since there's a diversity of cultures, there's a diversity of thoughts. If we want to standardize the use and customs and thoughts, I think it's somewhat difficult. We all think differently. It was a great pleasure, Dr. Erika. This was my comment. And this is a phenomenon that it's been popular in the rest of South America. Thank you. Send you greetings from La Paz, Bolivia. The challenge of the world, and Bolivians faced even more challenges. But I would say that this tension between diversity, ethnical, economic, and the fostering for rule of law, the economics, and the demands of the citizens that lead us to want to be equal. And those are real tensions, and one of the challenges we have, my colleagues would be really proud when they work with the Spaniard monarchy. It's not that we want to replicate the model, but the monarchy that lasted 3 centuries in 3 continents, it is a relatively successful measure of this. So we can put this on the table. This diversity is important, and a common language and shared goals. The problem is that like to want, because we have limited resources and we need to see how to ensure the welfare for the largest number possible. Thank you very much.
Yes, this is a topic that I have been considering for a long time. So, how can we see the policies followed by Europeans, the domination and the killing? Mapuches in Argentina, Redskins were exterminated. We have the example of Blanca Mérida. The intention was to eradicate the Mayan population. That was the purpose of Díaz de León. Montejo? Montejo, yes. So there was a policy of murdering. On the other hand, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, this was a domination that continues historically. How can you see these two differences? To head to the closing of your conference. History like a lady sitting, or where when we talk about historians, they try not to judge, see the context, how men and women at an era understand the problematic, how they solved in some spaces, and the more vulnerable, the narrower. For a long time, they thought that these two options, and the ones adopted by the English-speaking colony and the Catholic Church, Catholic nations were more open, more willing to integration, so they built this domain, and they tried not to exterminate. Defines extreme solutions or intermediate solutions, because you can have a first stroke to make a population subject to you and stop them from being a threat, and then have a dominance policy, populations that are integrated to forced labor, versus populations where you see a dynamic labor market. So for those that are establishing this dominance territory, implement their labor regime. And the answer is not linked to religion, but their own circumstances that lead to opt for one of the options. Let's not forget that this not only happened during the colony period, but the big campaigns to resolve the problem, it's called like that, the indigenous problem, are of the 19th century. So it is not only a problem of European dominance over the Americas, but a problem which is wholly inherited to the national state, and it is worsened for the rejection of the modern state to these two diversities. But I think that the idea would be to put the Sioux to work, but they had different ways of doing their things. Before the impossibility that they believed, you have the case of the Triple Alliance. This was later on. They exterminated all men in Paraguay, and they took a lot of the territory due to instructions of England, and they just maintained children, so they grew with a different idea. But some of them dominated and some others exterminated. And I don't know if you read the book, which is called The Open Veins of Latin America, from Eduardo Galeano. Well, we are closing then. Excellent book. Yes, certainly it is. Yes, incredible. But well, the important thing is to see how it is used in America to grow. As Mr. Lopez mentioned, the bad is done. Now, how can I use this to grow? Very good, Erika. Very interesting. So let's turn due to the agenda to hand out your participation diploma, and Judith will have something for you. Let's give the floor to Judith. Judith, please go ahead. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Pani. We want to ask Adela Dashet to hand out this recognition to Dr. Erika Pani. Good morning. Thank you very much. I want to share my screen. Dr. Erika, we thank you for your conference. It was a very interesting speech due to all the experience and knowledge. It was a quite interesting talk. Many points of view, many questions. So we extremely thank you for your support. I'm going to read the diploma. UC&CS America grants this diploma to Erika Gabriela Pani for her valuable participation as a speaker in the conference cycles 2020, October the 12th, the encounter of two worlds. Thank you very much. And a big applause on the distance. We are distant because of the reality, but we thank you very much for what we learned. Thank you very much to you. Thank you, Erika. Thank you very much. Thank you, Doctor. Excellent speech. Thank you very much and have a very productive and nice encounter. See you soon. Bye.